the morning of day 2 and it's time to make your bread dough. So your starter has been setting out all night, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's bubbling on the top. It's filled with bubbles and it's ready to go. It's relaxed. It's about doubled in size. So we're going to make a dough that is 75% hydrated. We're going to start out with 500 grams of flour, which means we'll need 375 grams of liquid. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to start out with 450 grams of bread flour. We've got 50 grams of whole wheat flour. We'll mix those two together. Now we've also measured out 325 grams of water, filtered water, with an additional 50 grams on the side, and 10 grams of salt, which we will add to the 50 grams. We're going to add that later. So, at this point, we will take the starter and we will add the starter to our water. Excuse me, the leaven to our water. We'll add the leaven to our water. And we will dissolve it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do this with my hand. It'll just make it a little easier to break it up. Take the combination of the leaven and the water, and we'll mix it. Now we'll put the plastic wrap over the top of this. And we'll let it rest for 1 hour. Now we still have our salt water here, which we'll add to it, but if you add it at this point, it's going to inhibit the fermentation. So you're going to let this set for an hour to relax and to really get a foothold, and then we'll add our salt. Okay, now about an hour has passed, and as you can see, the dough has relaxed considerably and increased in size. Now don't worry about it being exactly an hour. It doesn't really matter. It'll fit your schedule, an hour, 2 hours. You know, the point is to get this established and then add your salt water. So you'll take the last of your 50 grams of water and salt, mix it up, pour it on in. Now you're going to get in there with your hands and literally squeeze that dough through your fingers. This is kind of the fun part. You're going to break it up, and eventually you can work that water right into that dough. considerably softer because it's a wetter dough. And that's as close as you're going to get to kneading this bread. So you're going to take this plastic wrap, put it back on the top, and you're going to set this aside for the rest of the day. Alright, at this point your dough has been setting all day, fermenting and rising, and the next thing you need to do before you call it a day is to shape it into a loaf so it can do its final rise overnight. Alright, as you can see, the bread dough has just about, I think, quadrupled in size. It's really filled that bowl up, and it's very light. So what we're going to need to do, since the glutens have been developing, the gluten chains that give it its structure have been developing, at this point we're going to need to take this and form it into a loaf so that we can leave it for its final rise overnight and then bake it in the morning. So what I'm going to do is flour the work surface. Now you can use any kind of flour, regular bread flour, white flour, that all works well. I actually like to use rice flour because it really doesn't clump, it's easy to control, and I also like to put it in one of these little Parmesan containers, which makes it real easy to apply. So I put that down. And then when I'm done with this, I can put it, just set it right in the refrigerator or the freezer. So you don't want to put too much flour on your work surface because you do want the dough to stick just a little bit. So we'll turn this out onto the work surface. Now that's going to deflate just a little bit. But that's to be expected. That's why you're going to give another rise. And I'm going to take a little of the flour, sprinkle it over the top, and I'm actually going to use my bread knife a broad knife, actually what it is. I'm going to also use this if I need it. But these broad knives are great for large loaves like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start and I'm going to scoot this along, and you'll see that it will tuck. It'll catch on the work surface and it will tuck underneath. So then what to do is you'll change directions and apply a little more flour as you need it. Then we'll work from this direction. Now you can see what's happening as the tension pulls on the leading edge of this dough. It tucks it underneath and it makes a ball out of it. But more important, as it's making a ball out of it, it's pulling the surface tight. And that's giving it structure. That's going to allow it to stay in a loaf form as it rises overnight. And you'll kind of get used to a technique, find something that works for you. But that tight tension will not only keep it in a loaf form, it will help the crust to rise. At this point, we're going to take a piece of parchment paper. I'm going to take this, scoop it underneath up on my fingers, lift it onto the middle of the parchment paper, and very gently. Now that worked great. I didn't even need to use the other bread spatula. Now of course it's fallen just a little bit from being handled, but that will be rectified over the course of the night, and then I will take whatever container you're using. And this is the reason for the parchment. It makes it much easier to handle a damp dough like this, a highly hydrated dough. So I'm going to set the dough right inside of this colander, and then at this point you're going to want to cover it again, but I suggest using cloth, whether it's a washcloth, a towel, whatever it is. You're going to want the surface to dry out slightly, but you also want to keep contaminants off of it. I like to use a piece of linen simply because the linen doesn't tend to leave little fibers if it touches the dough during the course of the night. So, at this point, your dough is shaped. You're going to leave it to do its single rise, its final rise over the night, and then in the morning we'll commence baking.